When archaeologists unearth a skeleton in the Galilee region of Israel, an area the Gospels associate with Jesus, they make a startling discovery. The body was given a type of burial that was used during a brief period just before, during, and after Jesus' lifetime. The body's location and treatment raises the question. Is there any way to know if this person could have come into contact with Jesus of Nazareth? Now, our team of scientists is using cutting-edge technology to find out. We're basically going to learn about his entire life.
That's correct.
Amazing. After 2,000 years, they're going to put a face on a man who may have looked at Jesus, talked to him.
I'm totally excited. I think it looks fantastic.
Or was even one of his earliest followers. I cannot wait to see what this is going to look like. And unveil a lost face of the Bible. So here we are, examining our ancient skull in your lab. Now, looking at this incredible specimen, just morphologically speaking, what can we learn about this man? Well, first of all, was he a man?
Was he a male?
Mm-hmm.
Well, judging by the very developed protruding supraorbital ridges with a pronounced mastoid process, the orbit, they are more or less square. The superior rim is very thick. This is a male skull, there is no doubt. This individual was way over 40 years of age. For the Roman period, this was quite an old age.
Do we know exactly where he even came from?
Well, it's hard to tell, but during the Second Temple period, we have two groups of people in Israel. We have the Judean people and the Galilean people. Just look at the shape of the skull and see how different those two skulls are.
Oh, well, they're a totally different size.
Not just the size. First of all, look at the shape of the skull. You see, this one is very wide, like a pear-shaped skull. And the Jews from the Upper Galilee had a completely different skull shape. You see, it's much narrower and much longer.
Just by examining the morphological features of the skull, we can know that this gentleman came from Jerusalem, or the surrounding areas, and this person would have come where Jesus was from. Professor Herskovits is certain it's the skull of a man who originated in the Galilee. And judging from the man's age, he was unusually healthy. Archaeologists found the skull near or in an ossuary, a bone box, in the 1970s in a place called Sasa, 30 kilometers from the Sea of Galilee. It's here, according to the Gospels, that Jesus lived most of his life and attracted many of his earliest disciples. And it's also here that our mystery man was buried in the way that the Gospels describe Jesus' burial. Starting in the 1st century BCE in Judea, Jews used a complex interment method called secondary burial. First, they wrapped the body in a shroud and placed it in a burial tomb for approximately 1 year. Then, the family gathered the bones, placing them inside an ossuary. Finally, they laid them to rest in a burial cave, awaiting resurrection. Archaeologists have discovered thousands of these ossuaries in Jerusalem. But here in the Galilee, where they unearthed our man, the discovery is rare. When the tomb was uncovered, Roe was a 12-year-old boy who lived in the area.
השופל עבד כאן למעלה, עבד כאן שופל גדול, שבעצם חתך את קיר הסלע, וכדי לבנות את המקלט שנמצא כאן מתחתנו. והשופל, כשהוא חתך את קיר הסלע, הוא פתאום גילה פתח של מערה, וזה היה מה זה מפחיד. אני כאילו בן 12, אני נכנס פה. עכשיו, בכל אחד מהכוכים שהיו כאן, היה ערימה מסוג אחר של עצמות. היה בכוך אחד מלא לסתות תחתונות. בכוך שני מלא גולגלות הזה. כוך שלישי העצם הזה. זאת אומרת, פשוט כאילו איזה מישהו מסודר נכנס לקבר אחים וסידר בערימות מסודר לפי הסוגים. אז ככה, אוקיי, אם אין כאן איזה רוחות שמחכות לי מאז.
That cave had, among other things, gold leaf, oil lamps, which is very important because the oil lamps are essential for dating. It's the only cave from the Roman period that we excavated that was a sealed cave, and we were the first ones in after almost 2,000 years.
The practice of stacking bones according to type is usually associated with a time after Jesus. This may be one of the reasons why archaeologists date the cave and the skull found in it to the 2nd century. If they're right, then Professor Herscovitz's skull belonged to a Galilean who lived about a century after Jesus. The only way to know for sure is to perform a carbon-14 test on the bones.
Carbon-14 dating is really all about determining when something died. When was it last respiring? This is why it's an archaeological tool.
The test will determine if the skull dates to the 1st or the 2nd century.
We received the bone fragment from Professor Herskowitz. We ran through our radiocarbon dating processes.
After 3 days, results come in, and they're very surprising.
And this is a picture of the actual material we analyzed to give this very interesting radiocarbon date of 1st century AD, an exciting number.
So this man definitely lived when Jesus lived, and was buried in the tradition in which Jesus was buried. But is it possible that he knew Jesus? If he made it to the Sea of Galilee, he would have been hard-pressed to miss the healer from Nazareth. In actuality, the Sea of Galilee is a lake. Jesus spent most of his ministry on its shores. According to the Gospels, most of his disciples had their homes here. How important was this sea, the Sea of Galilee, or the Kinneret as it's known today, in Jesus' ministry?
Well, it was the beginning point, really, for Jesus' ministry because Jesus himself was brought up here, although he was born further down south in Bethlehem. He was raised here in Nazareth. So Nazareth and the surrounding territory of the Sea of Galilee would have been his natural home environment, just as it was the home environment for most of his disciples, too.
And where there were homes, there are now buried and forgotten clues to the lives of the people who lived in them. Archaeologists are now following a trail of pottery, glass, and stone. These artifacts may be able to tell us whether Galileans had the means and ability to travel, allowing our man to come face to face with Jesus. What can we learn about typical Galilean life from the findings here in this village?
Very common misconception in ancient Christianity scholarship, viewing the Galileans of early Roman period as poor people who have huts made of straw and having nothing. That is not the picture at all. And when we compare the household of a villager in Hammam to a household of a city citizen in Tiberias, they eat from the same pot. They have the same storing jars. They have the same glass vessels. Well, you can see these are the finds we find also in the big cities. The standard of living was pretty nice.
So this would seem maybe perhaps to be a kind of a creature comfort of a wealthier person.
Well, since we find many, many fragments of them in every house we excavate, it seems it was pretty common.
I don't want to break it.
Yeah, I'll put it back.
But what was life like in nearby Sasa, where our Galilean lived?
Sasa is a typical agricultural Jewish community from the Roman period that is almost self-sustaining, as we can see from the oil press that's here and the wine facility. There's a synagogue that has not been excavated. There's a ritual bath here. I mean, these people were not poor.
So it seems that our man from Sasa came from a well-to-do village and had the means to travel if he wanted to. But what did he look like? At the Lady Davis Carmel Medical Center in Haifa, Professor Israel Herskovitz and his team are trying to find out. They brought our Galilean skull for a CT scan.
What do we hope to learn from the CT scan that we couldn't discover just from our physical observation in your lab?
Imagine to yourself that you are standing outside a house. Who are the people living inside the house? So the CT scan actually opened the door to talk to the people, to see what's inside the house.
We're basically going to learn about his entire life from this CT scan.
Yes, absolutely.
Amazing, amazing.
The scanner uses X-rays to virtually slice the skull into thousands of cross-sectional layers, which the computer then digitally assembles.
You see there is an advanced periodontal disease over here. Much of the bone over here was resorbed already.
The teeth are like this diary.
Yes.
This physical diary of exactly what he ate, how old he was, and what kind of life he led, what kind of health he was in.
He was a healthy person.
In biblical times, health equaled wealth, reinforcing the idea that our man was not poor. But how might our Galilean have earned his livelihood? This area was known for its olive groves and vineyards, meaning our man from Galilee might have been an olive oil or wine merchant.
If you live in the hills and the mountains, you will probably raise olives or grapes. Maybe sometimes you'll have a herd of sheep, but a well-to-do village, well-to-do society.
So you took advantage of your surroundings, whatever the environment offered?
Exactly.
Uzi Liebner has just excavated an olive press dating from the time of Jesus, just 27 kilometers from where our skull was found.
Now, have we found an archaeological record that supports this area being an agrarian or farming community?
We are standing now inside an olive oil plant, which is currently being excavated. Right here behind me, you can see the first stage of olive oil producing. It's a crushing basin. They bring the olives in, they crush them in the basin. Second stage, you take the olives in sacks or bags, and you pile them right behind you in this installation, which used to have a huge beam with weights that were tied on top of the beam for hours and even days, presses the olives and produces the oil.
This is an incredible shape.
Right.
Is this normal to find an olive press in such great condition?
Generally not. This was all buried under a huge collapse, and it stands intact. We're just missing the donkey that rolled this wheel around.
He's probably around here somewhere.
So the evidence suggests that our man from Galilee lived at the same time and in the same place as Jesus. And he probably had the means to travel if he so desired. Now, it's up to the forensic team to reconstruct his image and for the first time, bring us face to face with a Galilean from Jesus' time. Forensic scientists aim to reconstruct the face of a skull found in the Galilee, belonging to a man who might have known Jesus. The skull was found to the north of where Jesus spent most of his ministry. Could their paths have crossed? At Wadi Hammam, archaeologists are discovering that if people wanted to, they could travel along a recently unearthed network of roads.
Our village benefited from the location on the central route crossing Lower Galilee. There's a road, an ancient route that leads from the Kinneret, from the Sea of Galilee, right beneath us, and it goes to central Galilee and to the Mediterranean coast.
You had a thriving trade route right at the bottom of the hill.
Right. We can show routes of trade from village to city. How do we do that? The best tool we can use is pottery, because the pottery, we can study the chemical composition, we can detect where it came from. And they produced pottery which traveled all around the Galilee. We find it in many, many rural sites and in Tiberias itself.
If our man came face to face with Jesus, the most likely place this would have occurred would have been a synagogue, where according to the Gospels, Jesus preached. The Gamla Synagogue is one of the few Jesus-era synagogues discovered in the Galilee area.
The Gamla Synagogue, one of the oldest synagogues in the world.
When was it built?
1st century. The focus of attention is right here in the empty space in the middle, which means you face each other. and you discuss with each other. And you see this on the benches here, on all sides.
So someone like Jesus of Nazareth, he would have found the synagogue as a useful platform for his message?
That would have been the platform for him. You would engage with ideas, with people.
And who was involved in synagogue life?
Everyone was involved. We have no evidence of any restrictions or anything.
Now, how many people would have come to a place like this on a Sabbath service?
It would be several hundreds.
Was our man one of them? And might he have heard Jesus preach? As historians puzzle over the possibilities, the forensic scientists face a mystery of their own. Israel Herskevitz's team discover a strange puncture in the man's skull.
This is a coronal slice, and you can see that there is a damage. It didn't penetrate through the skull.
Yeah, it doesn't look very deep.
Quite superficial, but still penetrating like 1/3 of the skull.
Can we make an assumption as to what caused that hole?
Sharp metal instrument.
Bow and arrow.
Bow and arrow, head
Knife.
of a spear, edge of a sword, or something like that.
But did this divot kill him? Herskowitz considers the forensic evidence.
It caused an inflammatory process, and you see that the bone built itself around the hole. So it's a healed injury.
It would have given him a hell of a headache.
Yes, absolutely.
But it didn't kill him.
Didn't kill him.
Doctor, if we know that he didn't die from this injury, can the CT scan give us a clue as to what finally did in our Galilean man?
It's a normal, proportional skull, typical to that period of time. No obvious or clear distortion of the skull or the mandible. It was a healthy person.
With the circle of forensic and historical evidence tightening, Herskowitz and his team are even more determined to reconstruct our mystery man's skull. At Caliber Engineering, Zvi Grinberg loads the digital files from the CT scanner into his computer. This crucial step brings the team closer to recreating the face of our Galilean.
Our 2,000-year-old man is looking pretty good.
He's looking pretty good, but we have a problem in this skull. One side is better than the other.
As you can see on the lower margin of the left orbital cavity, and the upper margin is missing.
The skull had some post-mortem damage, and Zvi must fill in the gap. He's creating a 3D rendering to send to the artist so she can reconstruct the face of a man who may have known Jesus. This computer model of an ancient Galilean skull is a critical step in reconstructing its face.
In this case, if you have to remodel it, you take the correct part and copy it.
You actually come as close as possible to the natural shape of the skull.
Since our Galilean lived at a time when the Temple of Jerusalem stood, he would have made the annual pilgrimage required of all Jews. And if he made the trip from his hometown of Sasa, he would have probably passed through Bethsaida, a town from which at least 3 of Jesus' disciples came.
Bethsaida sat on the crossroads of the 2 largest highways from east to west and north to south.
This is the one and only street on the entire sites of Israel where you can look at it and say Jesus walked on this very street. Because if you go to Jerusalem, it's all medieval. You go to Capernaum, it's all Byzantine and later.
The name Bethsaida consists of 2 Aramaic words, Beth meaning house and Saida meaning fishing. And it's here that they've uncovered a 1st century fisherman's house.
There was everything that you would expect a fisherman to have in his home. Fishing implements, hooks, weights, basalt stones for anchors. And the unique thing about this village is that it plays a very significant role in the ministry of Jesus.
Right next door to the fisherman's house in Bethsaida, archaeologists have uncovered another, much larger house, and evidence which suggests it may have been used as one of the early house churches of the Jesus movement. The site of the First Supper, if you will, not the last.
The courtyard houses, just like house churches, there were house synagogues, praying in people's houses. This is the way the church began. This is the way I think the synagogue began in the land of Israel.
Houses excavated at Bethsaida could have accommodated single families. But there is one house that looks like it was built to accommodate a movement. This house could have been an early Christian safe house, or even the headquarters of Jesus himself. Our man from Sasa may have visited here.
This fits that description perfectly. You've got this courtyard, open courtyard. What a wonderful place to gather for prayer. No reason why I could not hold that as one of the first gathering places for these earliest Jesus followers. In here, we discovered 4 intact large wine jars, beautifully kept, just stunning.
With only a few synagogues in the area, people met and prayed at places like this. It has a huge kitchen, a wine cellar, and an unusually large meeting room. And most intriguingly, archaeologists here discovered what seems to be a first-century cross.
If this was the place where the apostles met for the first time, every single symbol on every single piece of pottery is meaningful. They adopted this symbol as a representation of what was meaningful to them.
If all of this reflects life in the Galilee, and the secondary burial tomb reflects death in the Galilee, then the skull, which we're about to reconstruct, may very well have come into contact with Jesus.
Back at Caliber Engineering, Professor Israel Herskovits and his team continue to reconstruct the skull of a man who may have known Jesus.
We have only one missing part just above the left orbit.
The skull has some post-mortem damage around the left eye socket. Svi must fill in the gap.
So what are we going to do to fill in that gap?
We are finding the plane of symmetry.
The plane of symmetry is the midline of the face. It's about halfway.
Yes. So what we are attempting to do is to mirror one side, copy it to the other side.
The computer is now making a mirror image of the good eye socket so as to repair the damaged one. After only a few minutes, the virtual surgery is complete. The broken eye socket has been repaired.
We have a symmetrical face. We can see the supraorbital ridges on both sides are very similar in size and shape. The orbital cavities are on the same plane, so it looks great.
This step was crucial for the forensic reconstruction artists. Without it, the hair, skin, and muscles won't accurately represent the face of our Galilean man.
Is that divot that was caused by some sharp object that happened before he died? Are we filling that in, or are we going to leave it just the way it is?
No, we leave it as it is.
Why is that?
Well, it's part of the skull.
We are done, and we can send it to print.
All right, let's do it.
The virtual model is now a digital file, ready for a physical 3D printing. But this is not an ink and paper job. This incredible machine assembles the hundreds of cross-sectional layers from the computer imaging and prints them as glue onto successive layers of fine powder.
It is done.
It is done.
Once the printing is done, Svi vacuums the excess powder. Now, we have an exact physical rendering of our Galilean skull. And what the vacuum couldn't get, the airbrush does. They're now one step closer to revealing the face of the man who might have looked upon Jesus.
May I hold it?
Yes.
A Galilean from the 1st century.
We've really given the artist something to work with, haven't we?
Sure.
It's like the most beautiful canvas that you could ask for.
Can't be better.
And we're almost there.
Now, they'll hand it off to the reconstruction artists who will give him a face. Professor Israel Herskovits meets with forensic artist Victoria Lywood to begin reconstructing the Galilean man's face. Herskovits points out the unique characteristics of the skull.
Look at the orbit, they are very small and not large, square-shaped and not rounded. Those are all important morphological features, which again tells you that you deal with what we call Eastern Mediterranean population, very much like the people who are living in this area today.
Israel, could you tell me what this man would look like as far as hair color? Can you suggest something as eye color, skin tone?
What you need to imagine is today's Mediterranean people with dark hair, slightly curly, brown eyes, light brown skin, a lot of wrinkles probably on the face because they stayed outside in the sun for a long period of time every day.
Oh, you didn't tell me how old he is.
Determining age just by looking at the skull is quite difficult.
Yes.
But I would say that roughly that this individual was around 40. That's it.
Lywood gets to work. Using measurements compiled from CT scans of living subjects with the same ethnic origin as our Galilean man, she meticulously glues corresponding tissue depth markers on the skull.
Well, I'm just putting the marker over here on his eyebrow.
These tell her how thick and thin the tissue needs to be in specific places across the skull.
A temporal bone on your skull. You can feel it in your head and in your jaw. Now, what it's going to do when I put in the next muscle on the mandible, the two join up, and this is how you open and close your mouth. But I mean, there's no way that we can put every muscle on. There's no way that we can put every fat globule on. So what we're doing are putting in the main muscles.
The muscles don't cover the tissue depth markers. Instead, they help Victoria determine the thickness of the tissue and the way it wraps around the skull.
Now, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to work around these tissue depth markers because I want to keep them there for reference. And they will eventually be covered up. And I'm going to leave most of them show through right till I get to the last point so that I know where I am on the face.
The most difficult area is the mouth.
And it's going to be particularly difficult with this mouth, knowing that there's an overbite here that I have to deal with. There's no lips here yet. There's an opening for them. We reach this particular stage that I call the Homer Simpson stage.
In Boston, forensic artist Greg Mahoney runs a parallel but higher tech process. He's working with a powerful computer program. Will his man from Galilee look similar to Lywood's?
It's an interesting skull in that what I'm seeing here is that these sockets are actually quite small in proportion to the rest of this skull. And what that should translate to is what looks like a little bit more beady eyes, smaller eyes. And when I look at it from the side, I can see from the nose, the nasal bones here, that the nose is probably going to be one of the more prominent features of this face. So it should be an interesting face to put together.
First, Greg fills in any missing features on the skull, including teeth.
So one of the first things that we need to do is I need to put some teeth in. And then I need to do that by pulling in teeth that have been taken from a different skull. So we're gonna import them and we're gonna reposition those teeth.
Next, he begins attaching skin and tissue to the skull.
So we're gonna create a map of tissue depth for the skull, and it's gonna help us guide the soft tissue, the skin, as it relates to thickness. To put tissue depth markers on with this method probably takes me 45 minutes to an hour. So compared to actually taking little cylinders and gluing it onto the surface of a skull, this definitely allows me to do things more quickly than I would do if I was doing an actual clay reconstruction in the physical world. We don't rely on these tissue depths too much. They're only meant to be a guide. One of the things that you want to be careful about when you're doing a facial reconstruction is you don't want to treat these tissue depths as like a connect the dots kind of thing. And I've seen that happen before where you see people rely on it too much and it winds up not looking as human as we would like it to look in the end.
Meanwhile, in Israel, the search continues to find out who this man was and whether he could have known Jesus. One clue comes directly from the gospel. Jesus was a healer, and all healers at that time of great illness were well known. He was also said to have been famous for his miracles, among them feeding 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish.
Jesus actually performed a number of miracles in this region. One of the most famous, I suppose, is the feeding of the 5,000, where with just a few loaves and fish, Jesus fed a whole multitude that had come to hear his teaching and to see his miracles.
In other words, according to the Gospels, in a single sitting, Jesus fed approximately 2.5% of the population in this area. If true, our man from Galilee had a 1 in 40 chance of being directly affected by Jesus. The circumstantial evidence connecting our man to Jesus continues to build. Now, it's up to forensic artists to give this mysterious Galilean a face. In her studio, forensic reconstruction artist Victoria Lywood takes her model to the next level.
He really does have a nice skull, this man from Galilee, because there really are a lot of insertions, a lot of information on the skull about where the muscles are sitting on this particular face. You don't always get that.
As Victoria turns to the man from Sasa's eyes, the face begins to come alive.
Well, as you can see for yourself, once you put the eyelids in, it makes a very big difference. All of a sudden, it's extremely human.
The nose causes some problems.
I'm just going to fit this in now, and there's, of course, much more work that has to be done with this nose. The nose looks pretty big right now. There is no perfect way of finding the unknown nose tip. He looks a little witchy there, doesn't he?
She now turns to the ears.
An older way of spacing these ears is to be able to put one finger behind them just to give it an average protrusion. You know, one theory is that the ears are approximately the same length as the nose, in which case his ears are just a little bit too short, but I don't really have much of an earlobe on here, so we'll get that.
In Boston, forensic artist Greg Mahoney adds muscle, fat pockets, and connecting tissue to our virtual skull.
You can see that that actually starts working out quite nicely. And this is where I might start going back and forth and start looking at the muscles I can look through so I can kind of see what lies beneath. And this helps me start looking at where these muscles are in relationship to the soft tissue that we're creating on top here.
Next, the ears.
We've got our other ear in place already, so I'm going to turn that on as well, too. The face is evolving.
The eyeballs and the eyelids. Greg now attaches the Galilean man's nose, but he doesn't have to make his from scratch.
I have a number of noses that I can import from a library, and I've imported one here that I think is relatively close to what we're looking for. And I'm just going to roughly get that in place for now. We're going to wind up fine-tuning it in a bit. So what I want to do is just get this and our mouth roughly in place. So we're going to turn the skin on. We can see here that this nose tip comes out further than what the formula tells us it should. So I'm just going to take our handy tug tool that we use so much, and we're going to push that nose back in. That nose tip until we get it to where we want it to be, which is going to be right about there.
As the forensic artists continue their meticulous work, the checklist of possible connections between the man from Galilee and Jesus is growing. The next possible link? Jesus' famous sermons, which hundreds of people in the Galilee heard. Jesus' revolutionary message was popular because Galilee was under Roman occupation. Predicting the coming kingdom of God meant that Roman rule would soon come to an end.
Was it dangerous being a follower of Jesus?
Other messianic movements in the area, all of them, were sooner or later attacked by the Romans, and the leader was executed and the followers scattered. It was not something you did without a special conviction.
And our man from Galilee may have shared that conviction. Victoria has almost completed her reconstruction, but she still has a few finishing touches to add.
Well, the reason that I'm texturing this is just strictly to give it a finished look. I want to have a little bit of skin texture. The sandpaper does that. And it takes away some of the shine on this. Gives a powdered down look without it actually being powdered down. When he smiles, this part is going to crease. I'm just putting a little extra clay in here so that I can subtract it where I want to see some of his creases. Because this fellow is between 40 to 50 years old, we're expecting some graying in his hair, and I'm going to be making his beard a little whiter.
So I've heard back from Dr. Herskovitz, and he's quite pleased. He said himself that this is very much like what he imagined that this subject would look like as well. So from looking at the skull, I think it's interesting to me to hear that I think we both had similar ideas of what this person would look like. A person who lived 2,100 years ago in the time of Jesus Christ.
Greg now sends his Galilean to Stephen Taylor for the finishing touches. Stephen is an expert on the outer layers of the face. Skin texture, hair, weathering, and what our Galilean might have worn.
I'm looking at the face that Greg has sent over, and some of the things that I'm noticing, you know, for defining features of this really great sort of hooked nose, real shallow sort of cheek depth here, very full upper lip, pretty cool stuff. To think that this guy is 2,000 plus years old. And what I get to do is kind of take all of the different influences and references and stitch them together into what we hope is a compelling picture of what this guy might have looked like.
Stephen applies a lighter digital mesh around Greg's dense model. This allows him to move more quickly and with greater flexibility. In essence, a sort of virtual shrink wrap.
So I've got two colors of gray on the screen. The one that I'm tugging on is the new symmetrical mesh, and I'm just trying to push it and pull it till it's just barely penetrating Greg's original head. This is gonna give me a nice tight shrink wrap in as few steps as possible.
Stephen adds some wrinkles, aging, and sun damage to our Galilean's face. He now moves to the head covering.
So as I'm moving around this head covering, what I'm really concerned with is making sure that this fabric seems to drape naturally. Trying to get the illusion of weight is really important. You know, I look at it from the side, maybe it looks a little too much like a Jedi. You know, we're gonna tone that down, get it to look more like a head covering. Okay, so I'm gonna throw some color on this really quick. So I'm staying all inside of these earth tones, these natural dye tones, knowing that this was an early period in time. I'm not gonna go with any super saturated colors.
At this point in the reconstruction, Stephen's job is to get the skin color right, in line with the historical records.
This is a process of adding layers, using this spray and going over the surface to add variation, and then pushing the darks and lights around his nose where there would be highlights, and lips where there would be blood close to the surface, and then there'll be the mid-level, which is going to have the freckles and moles and sunspots and all that other good stuff. This is a pretty long and intense process, but the results are well worth it. This is kind of the real fun part of my job because I can help to tell his story.
The next step is a painstaking process to get the man from Galilee's hair just right.
I have some indicators for the hair patterns. Now I'm gonna start laying out the beard, and then we'll be able to move on to the final renders. So all of the historical evidence that we have would indicate that this guy would have had a beard. And so it's going to be a mixture of, you know, some long, straight hairs. It's not going to be completely full and thick. We're starting to add some gray hairs in. His wrinkles, the sun damage on his face, his beard are all contributing factors towards creating a picture of what he would have looked like when he was alive. It's just a manual procedure of going in and modifying these curves It's sort of like going through and combing the beard piece at a time.
Two forensic reconstruction artists with two completely different approaches continue filling in tiny details on a man who lived in the time of Jesus and may have even known him. As the man from Galilee's face nears completion, a new archaeological discovery provides a final, compelling clue in the quest to link this man to Jesus. It has to do with Magdala, Mary Magdalene's hometown. In the 1st century, Magdala was a large, important Galilean city, home to 40,000 inhabitants. Magdala is the Aramaic word for tower, and a tower still dominates the site today. It's here that some scholars believe Jesus met Mary Magdalene, or Mary from Tower Town. The trade route from Sasa to Jerusalem would have taken our Galilean man directly through Magdala. An archaeologist recently found a synagogue here on the outskirts of the ancient city. We can now imagine Jesus, his disciples, Mary Magdalene, and our Galilean all praying right here.
מגדלה בעצם מוכרת במקורות הנוצריים.
נכון.
מרים מגדלנה, שהיא אחת מהתלמידות המועדפות של ישו בסופו של דבר, היא מכאן, היא מרים המגדלית, באה ממגדל.
נכון.
וישו באותה תקופה, אנחנו יודעים שהוא מסתובב באזור הזה של הכנרת. כפר נחום הוא צפונה לנו אולי 3 שעות הליכה.
This new discovery opens a window on the life of our man from Sasa and the life of Jesus. The archaeological and historical investigation is complete. Chances are that our man from Galilee would have not only heard of Jesus, but worshiped with him. Victoria now puts the finishing touches to her reconstructed face.
Now, using the information that we've received from the anthropologist and the information that I was able to glean from the skeleton, I'm satisfied to say that this is the face of the man who lived 2,000 years ago in Galilee.
Through the miracle of modern science, we can now come face to face with a man who may have gazed upon Jesus, listened to his sermons, perhaps even followed him. Stephen's computer model also nears completion. Remarkably, his seems to be a younger version of Victoria's reconstruction.
Everything looks like it's working really well. I think he looks fantastic. I think right now, one of the things that I might do initially for the final product is just knock down some of these bright highlights and make it a little bit dustier, a little bit drier.
For Stephen, days of detailed, demanding work finally pay off.
I'm really excited about how his wrinkles and the beard and everything just kind of brings him right to life. It really starts to let your imagination wander. It gives you an avenue for a story about what this guy's life might have been. He definitely looks like a man who could have walked in the time of Jesus. I'm totally excited. I think it looks fantastic.
The digital process and the manual one produce similar results. For the first time ever, we can look at the face of a man who lived 2,000 years ago in the Galilee. He may well have crossed paths with Jesus. But did our Galilean actually know Jesus? It's possible. His remains date to the right time period, and he was found in the Galilee. It's there that the Jesus movement first formed. And it's from this area that his message spread to the rest of the world to become the Christianity we know today. Maybe he heard the Sermon on the Mount, or followed Jesus into Jerusalem and witnessed the crucifixion. Perhaps that's why our Galilean man and Jesus share the same burial. Perhaps he was a follower of Jesus, not just during his life, but also in his death.